Well, happy Thursday morning, everyone, and welcome back. I'm so glad to be with you. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and this is what I call my morning musings. Enjoying a couple of cups of coffee this morning. I'm running a little bit late, later than normal, but be that as it may, glad to be with you. This will be our closing presentation on 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5. I've tried to share with you the proper context of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. I've shared with you how all of the verses about the day of the Lord prior to 1 Thessalonians 4, all of them after 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and 5, all the way into 2 Thessalonians, demand a first century application. The question, therefore, is raised, upon what basis do we claim that chapter 4 must be something radically different? Paul never indicates a change of subject from that imminent day of the Lord that was to come against O covenant Israel. I've shared with you the linguistics. I've shared with you the comparison with the Olivet Discourse. I've shared an awful lot of material with you. But I want to remind you that lesson number 1 began by pointing out that the entire focus of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and chapter 5 is the restoration of the life lost in Adam. God told Adam and Eve, "Do not take of the forbidden fruit, because in the day you eat, you will surely die." God did not say they would die physically. They lost covenantal fellowship, spiritual life, if I may use that term, that day. They were kicked out of the garden, and from that point forward, as Ephesians 1, verses 9 and 10 says, it was God's eternal purpose that in the stewardship of the fullness of time, God would bring together in one body all things that are in heaven and that are on earth. In other words, God wanted to restore fellowship between heaven and earth. Whereas in the garden, Yahweh departed from man, kicked man out of his presence, just like when Israel sinned, Yahweh departed from them and kicked them out of his presence, as an illustration of man alienated from God. The promise was that in the last days, God would restore heaven and earth in fellowship once again. It is not a story of removing man from earth. Man was on earth in fellowship in the garden. So if God was going to restore that fellowship, He didn't have to destroy the earth and take man off of the earth to restore that fellowship. And so, as Ephesians chapter 1 tells us, God's eternal purpose was to restore the fellowship between heaven and earth. Notice how Paul essentially summarizes his discussion of this coming of the Lord, this parousia of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, to bring the dead with him, to have the living, quote, meet him in the air, that spiritual realm, and come back, as it were, to earth to dwell together in restored fellowship. Notice what Paul says. God has not appointed us to wrath, but to salvation through Jesus Christ our Lord, who died for us, now watch this, that whether we live or whether we die, we live with Him. What an incredible statement. The entire point of Thessalonians is a discussion of Christ's return to man on earth in the spiritual fellowship the spiritual covenantal fellowship that was lost in Adam. And thus, Jesus said, if a man keeps my saying, which is all in the present active indicative, he will never die. Now that can't be talking about physical life. Because everyone, from the time Jesus uttered those words until the present generation, either has already died physically or will die physically. No, Jesus was talking about if we keep His commandments, if we take of the tree of life, which is Christ, we will never die. Whether we live in this world, we will never be separated from Him. And when we die physically, we will never be separated from Him in that post-mortal existence. I hope you've enjoyed this series on 1 Thessalonians or on Thessalonians. I hope you will get my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, the Wedding of the King of Kings. You know, in the midst of all of the stuff that we might call the academic investigation, we can never lose sight of the eternal goal of God, and that is to restore man to fellowship with Him. Go to my website, eschatology.org, BibleProphecy.com, order the book. Mention that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook. I'll refund your shipping. Now, I can't do that for overseas orders. I'm sorry. I just simply can't. But I'll try to work with you if you live overseas and you want the book. So contact me, and I'll do my best to work with you. Thank you so much for joining me, not only for this morning's Morning Musings, but for this entire series. We will begin a new series, Lord willing, next Monday. You have a fantastic weekend.